Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Sigma 50mm f1.4 art series in a Sony FE mount. And of course, the original 50mm f1.4 art was released in 2014 and was released to great acclaim. It was an extremely sharp lens, had delivered great image quality, and at the time, as a Canon shooter, when comparing it to, say, the Canon 50mm f1.4 EF lens, I mean, it was a night and day in terms of the sharpness and general performance. At the same time, in 2014, I tempered my enthusiasm over the lens with some concerns over the autofocus consistency. Not autofocus speed, but the consistency in that I didn't get consistently always either front or back focus, but some variation of them both. And of course, there were a number of people that had similar issues. Fast forward to 2018, and of course now these lenses are being re-released onto Sony FE mounts. And of course, one of the fantastic things about the transition to Sony is that all of those autofocus issues are in fact resolved. And if you haven't already seen it, I've actually done a multi-part series where I compared the 50mm f1.4 art via Sigma MC11 on the Sony platform, and then compared it to the Sony Planar 50mm f1.4. Today what I'm going to do is jump a little bit deeper into the actual performance of the lens, and particularly as compared to, less to the existing lens, because optically it is the same 50mm f1.4 art that you either love or don't love already. And we determined in that series that if you have a good adapter, you're getting basically the same kind of performance optically out of the adapted version as what you would with the native FE mount. But today I'm here to more examine the breakdown of how it compares to the very top of the heap Sony Zeiss Planar 50mm f1.4 lens, which I consider to be, in my experience, for an autofocusing 50mm lens, the best one that I have used. And it's the one that I purchased and made into my own kit. And I have reviewed 20 plus 50mm options over the last 4 or 5 years, and that was the one that got my money, even though it's expensive and large, although as we're about to find out, that's now a relative term. Before I do this, I recognize that there's probably a lot of you out there that would love for me to review every single one of the Sigma Art Series lenses that come out on Sony FE. And periodically, maybe in comparisons, I will look at them as it is convenient, but unfortunately, I just don't have the time to tackle every single one of them. And so what I'm about to say in regards to the FE version and how it compares to the, the adapted version, it's not going to be exactly true in every single situation. Some lenses adapt better than others, and I actually found that the 50mm f1.4 adapted quite well. That's not to say that there aren't advantages to the FE version. If you'll check out that video playlist, you'll find out that there in fact are. But today I'm more looking at the optical performance and whether or not you should consider this just as a lens, as a Sony shooter, as compared to the Sony Planar 50mm f1.4. So a few things about the build and the design of this lens. And by the way, I'm filming on it at the moment just to give you a sense of how it does in face tracking and video AF for this kind of situation. So this lens, unfortunately, in the transition to Sony FE, I'm going to get the bad news out of the way. It hasn't shrunk coming to Sony FE. In fact, it has grown. The base lens originally, it was 99.9 millimeters long, or about 4 inches long, and in this form here, it is, it's closer to, well, it's a good 5 inches or so. It's about 15 millimeters longer than the Sony Planar lens, and so it is definitely the largest 50mm option available. And unfortunately, it's kind of a good news, bad news. Good news is that it is lighter than doing the MC11 and EF version of the lens combination, which weighs in without caps attached, just the bare pieces, at 943 grams on my scale. And the FE version comes in at 886 grams. So, you know, there's a little bit of a weight savings there, but unfortunately that is a full more than 100 grams heavier than the previous heaviest 50 millimeter option on Sony, which was the, you know, the lens that I've been referencing, the Sony Zeiss Planar. It's 778 grams or 1.71 pounds. And so what we have got here is essentially a 2-pound 50 millimeter option. It's going to be a long lens. It's physically identical in length to the combination with the MC11 attached. So it's a long lens and it's a heavy lens. Now, one other good piece of news in the transition is that the original lens had no kind of weather sealing, and it's not like Sigma has redesigned adding seals at all the internal spots, but at the very least, they have added a rubber gasket at the lens mount that will help to give you a, you know, a little bit tighter seal at that point. So I say better than nothing. And so I'm certainly happy about that. And so this is still a lens with 13 elements and 8 groups. It has 9 rounded aperture blades. It does not have any kind of image stabilization, but of course, on many Sony bodies, you will benefit from the in-body image stabilization, and you know, everything is communicated properly to the camera, and so as a result of that, you do get correct corrections for stability, and it seems to work very well. You also get all of the in-body corrections for, you know, peripheral illumination and distortion and chromatic aberrations, and so all of that is good news. It functions very much like a native lens because it is now a native lens, and so that's a plus there. In terms of the operation, I found when doing a number of comparisons that really it performs quite similarly to the Planar when it comes to autofocus. Autofocus speed is roughly about the same. Autofocus sound is kind of similar between the two lenses in that when you're shooting in single shot mode and stills mode, you will get a little bit of like a faint whirring or grinding sound as which is really just the elements moving, shuffling along, because of course the emphasis in stills is to try to get autofocus fast. So they will move very quickly. It makes some noise in the focus motor. If you switch to AFC and you're just making minor adjustments, or you're shooting in video AF where it is slowing that down and trying to make smoother transitions, the great news is that the lens is essentially silent in operation. And so, I mean, you're not getting any real issue there. I found that IAF and even tracking worked just as well as the Planar lens on a Sony A7R Mark III. And so, you know, autofocus performance, I'm very, very positive on. And of course, I'm getting better, more accurate autofocus than I've ever gotten out of this lens previously when using it on Canon bodies. And so that's all fantastic to me. So operation, mechanics, everything seems to work well. If you do input on the focus ring and you're in either manual focus or DMF mode, you will get you know, the image magnified. There's not quite as much focus throw as what I would like, and that was always one of my original pans of the original 50mm f1.4 art. It doesn't have a whole lot of focus throw, particularly in that kind of critical portrait zone. And so manual focus, it's better here than it would be on a Canon or Nikon body, simply because you can magnify the image, you can fine-tune the focus. However, you may find that it can be hard to steady in on just the perfect focus point, simply because there isn't a whole lot of travel in that situation. And so while I do find that it's just slightly smoother than using the adapted version, they're pretty much the same. One advantage this lens does have is it can focus down slightly closer than what the Sony Planar lens can, and as a result of that, it has a slightly better maximum magnification, which is always very welcome. We're going to jump in and look at a few images here and see how it compares optically, both in terms of the sharpness and resolution, and then also in things like the bokeh quality, color, and rendering. Let's jump in, let's look at some images. For these comparisons, we're going to have the Sony Zeiss Planar lens on the right. We're going to have the Sigma Art lens on the left. Looking at these images globally, you can see that they meter just a little bit differently, and I would say, although settings were identical, that the metering from the Planar lens is probably a little bit more accurate here. But looking at things on a basic level, you're going to see fairly consistently through this comparison that the rendering temperature, color temperature of the Art Series lens is a little bit warmer than what the Planar lens is. Probably one of the great strengths, in my opinion, having done extensive tests already on the Planar lens, is that it really does deliver excellent color accuracy, which in some ways to me is more important on Sony body than even what it was on Canon, because I just find that Sony bodies, at least up till the A7R3, A7 III being better. But on this A7R3, 42 megapixels for this, that I find that it does, tend a little bit towards a yellowish tint. And so having a neutral color profile is a big deal. So if we look at center resolution here, there's really not a whole lot to distinguish these. They're both delivering an excellent center of the frame performance, even at f1.4. Good contrast. Image is not really marred by any pronounced chromatic aberrations that are causing veiling. And so, I mean, the Sigma is, and through this stage, I would say is even a hair better than what the Planar lens is. If we move off towards the edge of the frame, initially Sigma stays stronger, but as we get off to the very edge, you'll see a little bit of an advantage creep back, and that's particularly true if you move off towards kind of the extreme corners, where only at the very extreme corners do you see some softening from the Art lens, whereas we pretty much retain a corner-to-corner excellence from the Planar. Now at f2, these lenses are brilliantly sharp, just incredible contrast and incredible resolution. I mean, you're not going to get much better than this. And if we look off towards the corner, it's only in that now very, very extreme little corner that there's an advantage. Both of them, vignette is lifted somewhat. And outside of that, in terms of resolution, the Art Series lens is really, every bit as good as the Planar. By f2.8, they are equally brilliant. I mean, just exquisitely sharp center of the frame. If we move up here into the extreme corner, it's just about there for the Sigma. And so, I mean, from f2.8 onward, you're going to have just brilliantly sharp from corner to corner on either lens. Now, it is worth noting that at minimum focus, the Sigma can focus down a little bit closer, and it delivers a slightly better 0.17 magnification to the 0.15, which you can see here from the Sony Zeiss lens. Now, if we look at our plane of subject at minimum focus, we find just a little bit better micro contrast on the Zeiss lens. The trade-off is that surprisingly, there is a little bit more of longitudinal chromatic aberration on the Zeiss lens, whereas the Sigma lens is doing a pretty fabulous job when it comes to that. Looking at just some of these basic bokeh circles here, as you can tell, they're a little bit larger because of the extra magnification there on the Sigmas. Maybe a little bit softer in terms of the lining on the Zeiss lens, however, Sony Zeiss. And that becomes more obvious here. There's just a little bit more basic busyness compared to that of the Planar lens. Not anything significant, however. Now in this image you can see identical settings at f1.4. Looking at the bokeh quality from both lenses, it's actually really very nice. I would say looking up in this zone here, it's just a little bit softer from the Planar lens. And you can just see that it just renders softer rather than creating, circles. Just a nice soft, but you can also see a slight bit more of a cat eye shape in this corner than what you see on the actual Sigma lens. Now in this image you can see just there is the little bit extra warmth from the Sigma probably suits this type of image better. Looking at our pretty narrow plane of focus here, both of them delivering great levels of micro contrast. This is at f2. And, frankly, there's not a lot to distinguish them that I can see. Looking at this bokeh area, it's not hugely different. Over on this side, we have a little bit of busyness due to some circling. And, but it's not like one is particularly better than the other when it comes to that. Here's another rear world image, all settings being equal here. If we look, this is wide open once again, a pretty bright, high contrast subject here. And what we're going to see is in this kind of scenario with brighter light, there is just a slight bit of chromatic aberration that's apparent there on some of the edging of some of these blades that's not there on the planar lens. At the same time, it's nothing that you wouldn't notice outside of a pixel level. Looking at bokeh quality here, at this particular distance, I wouldn't say that the bokeh is any softer from the planar lens. They're really quite similar. And so, I mean, really I would say that the Sigma lens is hanging pretty close there. Now here's another, very closer to minimum focus here. I mean, in this particular image, I do slightly favor the look coming out of the planar lens, but again, it's pretty much a splitting hairs. I mean, if you look at the actual details from each lens, they're more similar than different, and I would say that pretty much anybody would struggle to identify which lens was which in a blind test. And I think in this zone here that there's a little fewer hard edges than there are on the Sigma lens, but again, it's not by any significant margin. So here are face crops here from a available light portrait series. Just a few things that I want to highlight here. Both of them have done a great job in terms of the micro contrast on the subject's eyes, and things like the lips have fantastic details there, and so all of that is good. Light fall off on both of them is good. I do think that highlights have been preserved just slightly more here on the planar lens compared to the Sigma lens, but again, without putting them side by side, I don't think that you would see the difference. Both of them look fantastic. Up here in the hair, micro contrast to me looks pretty identical between the two. They both look really excellent. Now here is a profile shot, and just looking at skin tones here, I mean, I don't think that there is a huge difference there. I think it's just a little bit more neutrality in the planar lens, just a little bit closer to accuracy, and a little bit maybe more warmth in the skin tones. But frankly, this really is it's a taste thing, and for those that will prefer one or the other, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know that any client is hardly going to notice the difference between these two renderings. And so, I mean, both of them are great portrait options. Okay, in this image, I wanted to just kind of look at something that I have noted sometimes with art series lenses, and that's in really harsh, bright light situations where chromatic aberration is neutral under better lighting, comes out a little bit more, as you can see here at f2 under this kind of situation. I mean, nothing major here, but you can see some purple fringing here with the bright sun in the frame, very harsh contrast. But that's not there to the same degree with the image that's coming out of the Sony lens. But looking at the two images globally, again, there's not really a huge amount of difference, and you can look at areas like this, and both of them look fairly similar, both doing a good job. Finally, when stopped down to f8, I wanted to take a quick look at how they were handling the flare, the sunlight coming through the trees. I mean, portrait type lenses, a lot of times you do like to backlight a subject, and so I wanted to give you a look at that. As we can see now with it stopped down, there's no issue remaining with that chromatic aberration. Both of them do show a ghosting artifact here. It's a little bit more pronounced on the art, but I mean, it is there, to be fair, on the more expensive Sony lens as well. And really both of them have held up contrast fine. I don't see anything here that would be a deal breaker with either lens. And so as you can see, while in an absolute sense, I do still very slightly favor the planar lens, its combination of feature set and size and performance, you can tell that it's really a splitting hairs. Yes, in a few areas, the planar lens is better. It has a little less chromatic aberration, a little bit better micro contrast. Bokeh quality is kind of a toss-up depending on the situation. But at the same time, I think that the Sigma Art series is so close that I doubt that most people would be able to tell the difference in most situations. And so, there is some minor improvements. The glass is a little bit better there, maybe a little bit better flare resistance on the planar lens. But I think that most of you, particularly if you're budget constrained, there's no compelling reason for me to tell you to not buy the new 50mm f1.4 art and a Sony FE mount. It's a great lens. It offers great performance, and if you can deal with the the heft and the size of the lens, at $949, it's undercutting the price of the the Sony Planar by about $500, and so that's a pretty significant difference, money you could spend in some other way. And so while I love the Sony Zeiss Planar, I think that the Sigma 50mm f1.4 art is a very, very close second. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, I have put together an image gallery. It's not huge, but just photos that I've taken as a part of this very quick review cycle. And so if you want to take a look at those, you're certainly welcome to. There's buying links there if you would like to order one of these for yourself, or order the Planar as well. I'll throw linkage there. And of course, if you haven't already, you can follow me on social media. You can sign up for my newsletter, become a patron. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.